Good evening once again to students. I hope you're hanging in there. You must have watched part one and part two of this presentation, I suppose. And I think you should if you haven't. Um, I hope you're gradually making sense of lesson planning now. So we have covered the pre-interactive phase of a lesson. There are three phases of a lesson plan. There is the pre-interactive phase, which has to do with the planning. Then there is the interactive phase, and then there is the post-interactive phase. I have covered the different domains. I've covered the different domains of lesson planning in the second explanation, in the second part of this presentation, which is where I talked about the learning objectives. Okay. And then we talked about Bloom's taxonomy. We talked about how to articulate or phrase your learning objectives. We talked about how to basically make sure that your learning objective or objectives are smart. That means they have to be specific, they have to be measurable, they have to be relevant or realistic, they have to be time bound. Okay, so in the next slide, we are going to now look at how you put this information in a template in the lesson plan document. Okay, so we are going to look at how you infuse the amount of information you include, obviously. So in writing out the lesson introduction, the development, and the lesson conclusion. So that will be the focus of our presentation in this third and the last part. So let's get going. I'll share my screen in a moment. Right. So we have talked about the planning phase. We are still on the planning phase, obviously. So when you have covered the routine information and you have decided on your learning objectives, you've decided on the content you're going to teach, obviously you would have thought about your assessment, because I have covered Bloom's taxonomy, and that is where you now design your questions based on different levels of cognitive demand. You now decide on putting the information in terms of the introduction, the development, and the lesson conclusion. So in your lesson introduction, this is where you focus attention. Okay, so this session is regarded as the attention grabber. That is, if you miss it in the lesson introduction, you may find it difficult to get back the learner's attention in the rest of the lesson. So this is where you want to have that wow experience. So you do something different. You need to be creative about your lesson introduction. Okay, this could be a demonstration. For instance, you could bring up two different objects. So one could be say if feathers, or pieces of papers, or something like this that doesn't have much weight, and another object that have lots of weight. For instance, and say you say, okay, learners, I'm going to put these two objects and put them in the same level, and I'm going to allow them to drop on the floor. Which one do you think will get to the floor first of all? I allow the learners to guess. To get what I'm trying to say. So you have to do something a bit different. So, and this simple explanation there, then you ask them question, why did this object touch the ground floor, the ground first of all, before this one? So they could say maybe because of the mass. Okay, the mass here is much higher than this on the piece of paper. For instance, they talk about how the object dropped on the floor, the type of movement it made, the speed at which it dropped on the floor, and all of that. So that could be an interesting way or a different way of introducing your lesson. And there are a lot of other ways, with which you can introduce your lesson. So you need to write this down under your lesson introduction. Okay, and you have to think carefully about how you put the information so that it makes sense and is clear. You need to think about the content, you need to think about the approach, you need to think about the resource. I think I've already shared two lesson plan examples. Okay, one that is considered reasonably good, and another one that is not so good, so that you could have an idea on how this information is put together in terms of the lesson introduction. So it is usually a shorter part of the lesson, about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the length of your lesson. Okay, so if you're going to ask questions, if you're going to read a case study, for instance, so you can attach those questions or the case study you're going to do, or the story, as an appendix. You include the questions there. There is obviously a space for you to jot down questions. You write down the questions you say you're going to ask the learners, you write them down. And it helps you to think these questions through before time. It is important, and that's where your planning comes in. Okay, you don't have to ask too many obvious questions, and you don't have to ask also make it like drills where it's a question and answer session. Okay, you need to give learners opportunity to engage, whether it's in the introduction or the development. Okay, ask different range of questions, right? So it has to be a wow experience. You need to think about what resources you're going to use to introduce your lesson. If you're in a well-resourced school, you could play a video, for instance. Let's say you want to teach about volcanic eruption, for instance. You need to play a demo of volcanic eruption, okay? Otherwise, you can also, use different little resources in your at home. Say you could use a fizzy drink, for instance, to demonstrate a volcanic eruption, or where you now shake the fizzy drink and open it and allow the gas to pop out and all of that. Just different ways. It could be as simple as that, or it could be, a little bit more sophisticated, if you have the resources to show that. Okay, so this must be something that captures learners' attention. You have to write it clearly what you would do as a teacher and what learners are expected to do. Okay, and you need to prepare the learners for the topic, and this could be done like I have indicated. It could be a newspaper article, for instance, which you ask the learners to read, or you read for them and explain, okay, the purpose of the lesson, and link it to real life is important. Learners need to be able to relate what you are teaching them to what they see in everyday life. Otherwise, the lesson is always not relevant to their lived experiences. It's very important. So when I share, or I believe I have already, but by the time you look at the lesson plan that is planned properly, you will be able to identify, okay, so this speaks to the resources, this speaks to the content, this speaks to the teaching and approaches that is going to be used for the lesson. Okay. Now for the lesson development, you also have to think carefully about the concepts you're going to teach. You think about the methods you're going to use to teach them. So this is where the core of the learning happens now. So this is the heart of the lesson. Okay, so the topic under discussion, this is where you unpack it, but you need to write it first of all before you teach it. You get what I'm trying to say? So you weave this information, you synthesize everything you've read from the textbook, from the internet, and you put it down in a way, maybe step by step. This activity will be done now. The teacher will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, using this in terms of approach and resources, and a kind of justification as to why you have chosen that approach. Get what I'm trying to say? And the next phase or the next step, this will be done, and all of that. So here you are creating opportunity for development of core content, okay, core knowledge, which or achievement of the learning objectives, okay, and you monitor understanding of new knowledge. All right, you describe what you are going to do and how you will teach these activities in detail. We always ask students to put detail in their lesson plans. We want to see the content you're going to teach. not necessarily packing or copying all the information in the textbook and copying it out in your lesson plan. You have to weave the information, but we want to see a level of the content there, okay? You need to have a list of all the activities that the teacher and learners will be doing. Okay, you can attach this as worksheet, as appendix at the end of your lesson plan. But like I have said before, make sure that there is alignment between the lesson content and the lesson objectives. So the facilitation of learning, you adapt, you check if the learners are copying or not. You think about differentiation of your instruction. Okay, if there are different types of learners sitting at different levels of thinking, okay, how do you make sure that all the learners are captured or are considered and are included in your lesson? You differentiate your teaching to make sure that different types of learning based on their abilities, are catered for in your lesson. Okay. Your teaching approaches, the type of questions you ask, and the resources. Okay. So all of this, you could start by using a simple spider diagram to put down, your lesson development. Okay. So you could have the big idea here together as, say, for instance, energy and change. Then from there, you write different types of energy. You put down notes on what is going to be covered under different types of energy. You put down a lot of conservation of energy, for instance. You take down some notes on what will be covered on a lot of conservation of energy from there. So all of this, by the time you have put down all of these different notes, so for each of them, you also include the approach you're going to use. Okay, it's going to be whole class discussion, or it's going to be a group discussion, or it's going to be a questioning, for instance. Then on the types of energy, you also say, I'm going to show them a video here, and then I will explain this or that and all of that. You get what I'm trying to say? So you break down this information so that by the time you write it out in the lesson plan, is a lot easier for you to capture, and you won't run out of ideas. Obviously, you have to look at textbooks and source for material and information so that you don't include too much, okay? Because the textbook kind of organizes the content in line with the CAPS document. So that is it for the lesson development. And last but not the least is the lesson conclusion. Okay, so in the lesson conclusion, this is where you conclude your lesson. Okay, you with focus on the core concepts and determine whether the learning objectives has been achieved or not. Okay, so you do a recap of the key points you have covered in the lesson here. You think about the type of questions you have to ask here very carefully, to inform you whether the learners have followed the lesson or not. You need to also be very creative about this. Some examples could be you do a quick quiz, you do a role play, you create a spider diagram of the main concepts. You could also ask the learners to come and create the spider diagram. Okay, so this is the planning for the interactive phase. Okay, so you plan for the interactive phase, the core teaching. Okay, now the last phase of the lesson of a lesson is the reflection. So you write out the reflection. Reflection is a form of conscious response to a situation or an event and the experiences you gain from that event. So like I told you guys during our first lesson or the second one, I can't remember exactly, you don't necessarily learn from experience, you learn from reflecting on the experiences. If you teach a lesson and you notice that the learners didn't give you their attention or they struggle, and you have explained a concept for 45 minutes and learners still doesn't understand, okay, and still did not understand, and you are frustrated because how can they not understand after 45 minutes? Then you reflect on that. You sit down and say, what a lesson it was today. what did I not do well? Or if there are things that went so well, then you reflect on that, you take note of that, then you build on some of those things in your next lesson. Do you get what I'm trying to say? This is why reflection is important. You reflect on action, the things that has happened. You're looking back so that you can build on that. The successes, the challenges, and the changes you will make for the future. So there is a session for reflection in your lesson plan document. You can use that to capture your reflection. All right. So that is the post-interactive planning of a lesson. Remember, there are 3 phases of a lesson: the interactive, the pre-interactive, sorry, the interactive, and the post-interactive session or phase of a lesson plan. Right, so there are other components in the lesson plan template. You've got learners that need special attention. So here you need to think about what you're going to do to make sure that you have accommodated those learners, excuse me, that need special attention. All right. So for instance, are you going to give them extra support in the classroom, or are you going to pair them with learners that are, you know, that are more able in terms of their understanding or in terms of their knowledge of the content? Okay, are you going to ask, you know, I would advise you to speak to your mentor teacher in terms of how to cater for learners that are, you know, that have special needs. You could give them less number of activities or less number of questions to do. And yeah, so you could think about different ways, but no learner should be excluded as long as they are in your classroom. Right. Okay, that is it for part 3, which is the last part of this interesting topic, lesson planning. I hope you've made sense of lesson planning now after watching this video. And it might not be the best of explanation when it comes to lesson planning, but I believe it's a lot easier to unpack this huge topic. The 7 you want to eat an elephant, you eat it bit by bit. Okay, so the big elephant in the room, we have started engaging it. So what you're going to do, I will encourage you to watch the recording. And so when we meet in the live session, we will now be able to do a few activities, and I will use the lesson plan template, you know, which you have in your assignment templates. So I will show you the study lesson plan template, you know, and we'll talk through each of the aspects in the live session, and then maybe do 1 or 2 activities to check understanding. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this recording.